Hello there and welcome back to Normal Guy Games. This time, Spearhead. So I got the new Sand and Bone set and I decided I'm going to paint it up. I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff to work on like Thousand Suns and some kill teams and whatnot, but for whatever reason, this is what I chose. So let's get into it and see what it looks like. So obviously the first thing you need to do is hit it with a black primer. Now, in this particular project, I'm going to be using regular craft paint because it's cheap and it's easy to use and it works for terrain. So none of the expensive stuff. I'm not going for my Pro Acryl or any of the Citadel paints, at least for the initial. Now I want it to sort of match up to my old terrain. I don't have these colors anymore. I was experimenting with Army Painter and I didn't really like the way that Army Painter went onto models, so I ended up not using it. So we're going to get this to a close approximation, and we're actually going to darken it down a little bit with a wash because I want it to be kind of dingy as opposed to this stuff. This stuff was a quick and dirty job with a sponge, and we're going to simulate that just, you know, on the new stuff. And as you can see on this stuff, I wasn't really in quite the mood to put any detail on it. I just kind of wanted it to sit on the table, but I ended up really liking it, and it was quick and it was dirty. And the easiest way to do this is to get a sponge. Now, as you can see here, gotta get a dog hair off of that. But anyway, you take a piece of that sponge off, you dip it into this craft paint, and you just dab it. It's pretty easy. It's simple, quick and simple, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So the first thing I did was get paint all over my fingers. And then I take that sponge and I just dab it on top of that black primered piece of terrain. Now, we are going to progressively get a little bit lighter until we get to the point where we're doing just the, like kind of that, I guess the kind of a phantomy sort of a greenish color, like a teal. I don't quite know what it is about that color, but I really like the way it turns out. Now, the next color up is going to be a lighter gray, and it's a pewter gray. And you can use any grays you have, anything you have on hand. I actually kind of mixed this with that darker color as well to give it... You can use any grays that you've got, and what I'm going to transition to here is pewter gray. Now, I did mix that with some of the darker gray to make a sort of a transition. You don't have to do that. You can actually go straight from the dark to the light, and it really won't affect it too much. But I ended up doing this and then another slight pass of that gray. Now, as you can see, I'm just kind of rubbing that sponge against the skulls also to give them a little bit of a brighter look. And we're going to go over those again here a little bit later with another bright color. But I'm taking care to leave some of the dark showing, some of the bright showing. And now we're going to move on to this like ghostly, haunted sort of a phantom green. And I did initially darken it down with some of that gray, but I ended up towards the end just not doing that anymore because it really wasn't that necessary. So you take this green and you kind of just splash it all over just the most prominent areas. Leave some of that gray to show among the rest of the green. And as you can see here, just kind of reload that sponge and keep going. Now this is what it looks like so far, and then we're going to move on and we're going to do it again. Now you can see here up at the top, it's hard to get that sponge up in the top where those little tines are, whatever they are, the little pointy bits. So we're going to take care of that in a different way. So what I did is I took a paintbrush and I sort of use that paintbrush to stipple and to blend and to get into those areas that you can't normally get to. And that includes on the tops of the walls, that includes on the sides of the posts where you can't get in. And then I moved on with that same brush and I started sort of over brushing a bronze. Now this is Pro Acryl, this is Monument Hobbies. And the great thing about this green is if you miss a part of that bronze, it just looks like verdigris. So it's not a big deal. This is a quick and dirty kind of a simple scheme, and as you can see, I'm just kind of laying that bronze on top and not really caring when and where it ends up, because the green sort of transitions just fine. And then I'm going to take the side of that brush too, and I'm just going to kind of do the sides of these metal bits here. Now this part is, you can use whatever metal you want, but I think that this bronze ended up looking really, really good against that green stone. I like the way it looks, I like the way it pops out, and quite honestly, I may go back and put a little more bronze in a couple other areas, so I'll show you what I mean here in a second. This part was particularly satisfying, so I'm going to leave the whole thing on there. I'm not going to edit it out much, but as you can see, I'm just kind of dragging the side of that brush across these, well, vines or whatever the hell they are on this statue. And again, I'm leaving some of that green showing. Now, of course, we do have a potato camera angle here because of the fact that it's a statue and her head is like right there against the camera lens. So I need to I need to get a little bit better on that part, but you know, as you can see, you just kind of drag that bronze paint across the tops there, and it will leave a little bit of that paint, and also it will leave some of that green in some places too, which again just looks like verdigris. So it's kind of a double thing here. It works twice as well. So that was my favorite part. Moving on, I took some thin downed white blue from Pro Acryl, or from Monument Hobbies, the Pro Acryl line, and then I just sort of blocked in the blood pool that's on the sarcophagus here. And the blood pool itself, we're gonna paint that in red, and unfortunately I kind of messed up on that. But this is my favorite part of this. It is so satisfying just to kind of overbrush and drag that white paint over top of the bones, over top of the candles, anything that should be white and standing out, like the scrolls over there as well. As you can see, this is how it turned out with that white, just kind of dragging it across everything. And I did this on all of the candles so that I can use a sort of a brighter paint over top of it without the black dulling it down. Now here's where I hit my first snag. I was just going to use a regular, just whatever metal paint, and I found out that I have had this paint for quite a while, and it did not, it didn't hold up well, shall we say. So there is a big dry glob of gunmetal paint in there. I ended up fishing it all out, but unfortunately the paint was just not salvageable. So instead, I swapped over to my more expensive paint, which is, of course, a better paint anyway. And I started blocking in all of the metal pieces, which would be the, as you can see here, the grates here on the fence. Anything else that stands out as metal, you do that as well. And this, again, doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You can leave some of that green on there as well, and it's not going to hurt anything. But this is what it looks like. So that's what it looks like once you block out that metal. Now, one thing I did want to point out here, unfortunately, I got a little zealous, and I painted the blood without actually recording it. It was just a dark red on the bottom and then a bright red on the top. And here, as you can see, I'm just using like an orange red just to get the very tippy tops of everything. Now moving on to the candles, this is how I do the candles. Now I'm not going to do any OSL. I usually would pull out the airbrush and put a little bit of OSL on there, but in this particular instance I didn't really feel like doing that. I just want this to be quick and dirty and accessible, so you can use any paint you want, any yellow, any orange, and all I'm doing here is just putting the yellow on the candle flames, and this is just a touch, plain and simple. And this is where that white paint comes in handy, because you're not going to have to do 2 or 3 passes of this stuff, because yellow is a terrible color to paint with. Yellow and orange are pretty hard to get on there right. But while that yellow is still wet, I'm taking some of that orange paint and I'm just kind of brushing it on the tips of the candles just to kind of give it like that orange hue. And that's that's it. That's it for the candles, plain and simple. Like I said, I can do OSL and all that stuff, but this is supposed to be a simple and accessible tutorial. This is not something that's supposed to take forever. So the next step I'm doing is to block out all of the metal, and that's going to be the metal pieces on the top here. Now there is like a metal, sort of a metal strip, and then there's also these little metal decorations, and we're going to do that. Now moving on to the green for the vines, I'm using the 3 Pro Acryl paints that I showed earlier, and these paints they work kind of like the same way as the Army Painter does, where they've got, you know, several shades of one color, and I'm going to be using that dark green to do the base coat on all the vines, and then progressively you want to add less and less of that bright on the very tops of everything. Now this is what the dark green looks like, and I'm going to take the regular yellow green, and I'm just going to paint that across all of the more raised areas, anything prominent, anything that would have access to the sun that might look a little brighter. And then for the next step, we're going to do the same with the bright yellow green, but we're going to be very sparing on this one for the most part. I might put a little bit extra on some of the longer spaces, as you can see, but yeah, that's about it. Now this wash, I got this recipe from Black Magic Craft. This is just a regular black wash, and I use this for most of my terrain. I did not hit most of the buildings with this terrain from the Corpse Rack Mausoleum from Warcry, but in this particular case, I kind of want to darken everything down, so I'm going to hit everything with that black wash. Now, honestly, in the end, it really could have been, it would have been fine without it, but, you know, live and learn. So this is where I'm switching to a contrast paint. I'm using Skeleton Horde, and I'm letting that sort of just thin out across all of the bones here. I don't want them to be too yellow in too many places and look unnatural. I just want them to look kind of weathered. And then I'm going to do the brown here. This is just for the wooden piece. Now I am trying something a little different here too. I'm going to put Reikland Flesh Shade gloss on this blood and see if I can make it kind of shiny and put a little bit of kind of a shadow in those lower areas. Now you got to be careful with this, but in the end, I think it turned out pretty good. I mean, you know, you've got the sarcophagus, you've got these wall sections. Now, looking at the banding and little decorations, I may go back and do those in bronze. You know, it's a little darker than my older Corpse Rack set, but honestly, if I throw a wash on that, it'll probably look the same. In hindsight, I probably could have just kept it, you know, left it without the wash, and it would have been fine. Anyway, so that is the quick and dirty scheme. A couple of lessons learned here, but still looks pretty good. And the statue, honestly, is kind of my favorite piece out of all of that. It's very nice. It looks kind of weather beaten and worn like a shrine. But anyway, so thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we will definitely see you on the next video, everyone.